Welcome to the Triskele podcast.
We are three druids gathered in a virtual grove
to share our thoughts and our path with you.
Hi, welcome to the Triskele podcast. If you are a new listener or viewer, welcome to the podcast. And if you're returning, welcome back. Today, we're going to be talking about the Otherworlds and the Afterlife. I'm not guaranteeing this won't turn into a two-parter or a three-parter because there's a lot of topic to cover, but we shall see how this goes. Before we get started, let's do introductions. I am Victoria. My pronouns are she and her.
I'm Drum. My pronouns are he and him.
And I'm Amber. My pronouns are she and her.
And as I mentioned, we are going to be talking about the Otherworlds and the Afterlife. And that is a huge topic. So this might turn into a mini-parter. This might turn into, here's a surface interview or surface conversation. We will see how this goes. So let's start out with defining the Otherworlds. I think we can all understand what the afterlife is. It is after our current life. But what are the Otherworlds?
Well, I'll jump into that one first. I think the Otherworlds very simply are, they are the worlds other than the physical world that we live in, the three-dimensional Newtonian space that we inhabit. That doesn't mean that they can't intersect with that Newtonian space, that the world that we live in, but I think it's it's realities or worlds that are different than the ones that we recognize every day. So, whether it's the she or the intersecting with the world of the ancestors, it could be, there's many combinations that we can talk about, but I think that they're the worlds that we don't normally experience.
Yeah, I think mostly I just agree. I think that trying to define something that is essentially theoretical is really challenging. And so I don't know that there are better words for it.
So I want to touch on a couple of points, one that each of you have said. So let's start with Drums. Drum, you mentioned the she, the good neighbors, the other folk. The question is, are they here in this realm, world? Realm is another word that I've heard to call what we call the other worlds in non-direct fame. But how do you see sort of their existence in this world, in other worlds? Where do we go from there?
I think as kind of a background, I'd like to recommend a book called Flatland by Abbott. It's in the public domain. It's been written a long time ago. It's a book about a two-dimensional creature trying to appreciate a three-dimensional world. And I think that I believe, and I'm a poor scientist, but I believe that these other worlds are, somehow interact with us dimensionally, but I think that they may have other dimensions to them that we can't necessarily appreciate. So I think that the people from the she, for example, or the entities from the she can easily interact with us. But I think it's a lot harder for us to interact with them. There's, if you look at the lore, there's gateways to the she. People go to the she and come back much later. So there's that time continuum thing that goes on there when they come back. So I think that there is they can come to us, they can lead us to them, but I think for us to find our way there is a little more difficult. So I think it's the she is a world that intersects ours in some way, because the Lord tells us that we can move between those places. So those points of intersection, that's the hard part. So I'll leave that to the physicists.
It's probably going to be the quantum physicists having fun with that one.
Yes.
But then again, I am a bit of a superhero fan, so multiverse.
I like multiverse too.
It can happen. And now I got completely distracted by that because my train of thought went immediately onto the she. And by the way, if you're looking for good books on those particular gentlefolk, Morgan Daimler is a fantastic resource on that. Highly, highly recommended. We will include a link to their website somewhere down below. And then I got distracted on what Amber was talking about that I was going to mention.
Probably that I used the word theoretical.
Yes, thank you.
I know how your brain works.
So Amber, you mentioned that the other worlds are theoretical. And yet, from my understanding, all of us have experience in those other worlds. And certainly there are many, many other people who have had that experience and documented them and written about them. And there is an interesting level of consistency between some of those documentations, some of those recollections from different people. Why do you use the term theoretical?
I use the word theoretical because we don't actually know what those other worlds are. We talk about them being another realm or another dimension, or we use lots of different terms, but I think we use a lot of different terms because we don't actually know what they are. And so that's why I say that it's a theory. It's not a theory that they exist. It's a theory of what, to me, we're theorizing what they are.
Okay, so that makes sense. I'm going to lean heavily on Marvel today. Apologies, Disney, don't sue us. But for me at least, the other worlds are really kind of like the multiverse, except they can actually impact each other. Right? So often you'll see folks talking about journeying to the astral plane or to the other world or to locations that are not on this earth or necessarily in this physical universe. And I have always interpreted that as places in the other worlds. Whether there's one or many, I'm not willing to say. As Amber said, we don't know exactly what they are, and I am not willing to commit to a decision on that, other than it's a thing out there. It's not here.
And that uncertainty there is 100% why I use the word theoretical, because we can all have our own experiences, we can all have our own beliefs or understanding, but I don't know that any of us can say for 100% sure fact that this is what it is. You know, you can say this is my experience, but that's different.
Sure, but we also don't say the gods are theoretical, and we don't know exactly what they are either.
I mean, I've talked to people who would say the gods are theoretical, but that's a different conversation.
But we don't.
Yeah, they're really
But I think that I mean, we could approach those from the same way, though, that we don't, that they're beings that we have interactions with, that we, you know, we've all had our own experiences, but we can't actually necessarily define what those are, what those beings are.
True. I'm not sure I want to try.
No.
All right. So our lore, our mythology tells us about different other worlds, different realms, different places. We have Tir na Nog. We have all of the various lands of the Norse mythology, all of the 9 realms except this one. So I guess 8 of the 9 realms, 6 of the 7 realms if you're working in the Anglo-Saxon paradigm. Greece has, they have Olympus. They have all of the different realms of the underworlds. And every mythology that I'm aware of has some definition of what the other world is. As in, they name it, not a definition of necessarily what it is. And in some cases, they talk about what's there. Are these the same place? Different locations on the same existence? What are they? Any ideas, theories, thoughts? This is purely UPG and hypothetical, I will point out at this point.
Yeah, they sound different to me. I know zero about the other worlds. I have my ideas, but I look at, I was raised pagan wise in the Hellenic tradition, and so those were the underworlds that I was familiar with, and know about the 9 worlds of the Norse and the She and all these different places, and or the Western Isles. Muldoon heads off for the Western Isles, and these all seem very different places. I mean, some of these are seaborne, some of these are subterranean. they seem like really different places to me. And I think that I don't think it's one continuum that has different like rooms. I think that these are separate places. And I don't know how to explain that. And, I think about the Knights in White Satin thing which says, just where you want to be, you'll be in the end. And so who knows, maybe there's something to that. Maybe we go to the afterlife that we think about when we go. I don't know.
You talked about the afterlife as if that was sort of a major component of the other worlds. And in some mythologies it is, but in many mythologies, there are worlds that have nothing to do with the afterlife. Is it the same place? Is it different? Do we know? Do we care?
I don't know. And for myself, I don't know that I really care. I mean, I know in the Hellenic scheme, I hope that I don't go there because they don't seem like very pleasant places to me. They seem kind of dark and dreary. At least
depends on where you land.
Yeah, no, that's true.
It depends on where you go. We'll stick with the Hellenic. This is something I know about that's Hellenic. Woohoo! There are stories of fields of horses and of feasts. It depends on where you go.
No, absolutely. I mean, I was just thinking of, Tartarus, things of that nature that may not seem.
Okay, I don't want to go there.
Right. No, absolutely. So I don't know. And I don't have a sense for myself in my belief structure. I don't have a sense of what comes next or what the transitional, is there a death bardo? Is there, do we step out of this life immediately into the next life? I have no idea. I'm still trying to get my understanding about this one, but I'm fascinated at the thought. And, I do see in some of my trance workings that I see my grandfather, my father's father, and I see him quite often. So where is he? I want to know where that is. So anyhow, I don't know if that answers your question, but
to me, they are different spaces. I mean, there are stories of deities interacting with the ancestors, but most of the time those interactions are with deities who are dedicated to that.
So in some of the mythologies that I can think of, the times where we've had deities interacting with dead humans to be a specific type of ancestor have always been in a specific locale. So you have Odysseus who goes into the underworld to rescue his wife.
Just kidding. It is Orpheus, not Odysseus. We didn't get a chance to correct it during the recording, but I wanted to make sure to do so after the fact. For more information on that myth, there's a link in the show notes.
Have deities from the Norse mythology who go into the underworld, or the hand of man, hand person, and anyway, one of the servants goes into the other world to rescue Balder, right? So the times you have that I'm aware of where you have deities interacting with dead humans or dead deities, it is in a space that is specifically designated for the dead. So you're in Hades, you're in hell, you're in H-E-L. You're in a space you're in a mound, right? In the Irish and the Welsh, there's a lot of you sit out on the mound and you talk to the deities. You talk to your ancient dead, but you're doing it at a specific place that is designated for the dead, as opposed to generally in the other worlds.
Right. I mean, there's not myths that I know of, at least, of the ancestors popping into Olympus and being like, "Hey, how's it going?" I mean, maybe it was just such a normal thing they didn't write about it, but
yeah. So I do think there are separate places. I think it's really interesting, though, that sort of idea that we have of these places of the dead being ugly. I know there's stories of when there's the attempted rescue of Balder, which fails, There are descriptions of the halls being decked in gold and feasts laid out. And there's just amazing, beautiful bounty in this luxurious palace. But then you have stories of going into an oven, and they vary, frankly. Some of them sound really bleak and terrible, and some of them sound kind of cool. It depends on where you are and what you're doing and how you're moving into those spaces.
Yeah, I think that the thing that always concerned me, or I was fearful of some of those locales and those stories were that they were terminal. They were end games that once you got there, you couldn't get out. That, you're here for all of you, forever. There's no exit strategy. And for I think that we go around the wheel a number of times, quite a few times actually. And so I feel that going to one of those places, at least in the lore, as I understand it, seems very terminal, and that once you get there, you're there for keeps. And I like to think that there's more of a kind of a recycling process that goes on. So, I
See, and I think that's part of what draws me to the Greek underworld representation in general, is that it has a little bit of whatever you want. There is a field of punishment. If you are someone who needed to be punished and, push a rock up a hill for all of eternity or whatever, that exists. There is Tartarus for the really bad people who should never see the light of day again. There's the fields where you're just kind of there. You're just not amazing, not punished, whatever, just there. There's Elysium where the heroes go, and from Elysium you can be a reborn. And if you're reborn from there, I think it's 3 times, you get into like the heroes hall or whatever. Like, no matter what your type of afterlife you're after, the Greeks got it for you, And so I think that that's kind of a really cool approach, but it also, for me, is one of those reasons why I can't say that I have any idea what happens when we die, because the Greeks say all of it, So how do you pick?
And in the Celtic traditions, in the various traditions, there are many stories of people going into the mounds and speaking with their ancestors and having feasts with them. And there is this concept of a permeability between the other worlds, where maybe you can actually move between them. And so you can't come back to this world necessarily, but you can come into the mounds and be with your ancestors and your descendants. And then you can go back into Novan and into the other worlds. And so it's just, what happens after you die? I'll tell you when I get there. But I like that kind of concept of that sort of fluidity, of you're not stuck in one place.
Right. No, I agree with you. And maybe that's a cultural thing, back in the day when there were, food was not a guaranteed source. Maybe having a feast always available was like something that was really kind of cool, and something that you'd never have to worry about, where in the structures of everyday life, you had to worry about where food was going to come from, especially in a hunter and gathering situation. Maybe for us today, the ideal, our Elysian fields would be, this like amazing internet cafe with, the internet stretches back and forwards in time, kind of like a TARDIS or something.
And if they put filters on for all of the crap that's on the internet first.
Right. Yes. Very good filters, like the best. So I don't know. Yeah, it's a good. I think you make a good point. I have no idea. But I know what I'd like. Not that that means anything.
I mean, we can get maudlin if we go there. Where do we go compared to our ancestors of different religions, and our descendants of different religions?
And that's a really good point. I mean, I don't want to get way off topic, but I call out. Yesterday was my grandfather's birthday, and he was born in 1887. If there is reincarnation, maybe he's already spinning again. Maybe he's gone through the wheel a couple of times. And so when you call out to your ancestors, especially deep ancestors, who are you calling to, and where are they now? So I don't know the answer to that question, and I think it creates an interesting discussion point and a just interesting paradigm that maybe they're there for a while and then they kind of move on.
At least in my experience, there is some part of essence that remains connected, not necessarily remains on this planet, or in the other worlds, but remains connected. I did a working once where I had a reason to reach to a Christian background, and my matriarchal line is very Roman Catholic, and I still have a connection to Mary and the saints, and and to those gods. And so that was the line that I reached through. It was through the mothers and the grandmothers and the great grandmothers and all the way down that line. And that was incredibly powerful for me. I could feel all of these women. I've met my great grandmother, so I've got a few generations back that I know personally, but I haven't met anybody before that. And they probably weren't Catholic, to be honest, because my great grandmother was half Chinese. So highly unlikely to be fully Catholic all the way down that line. Right. Even if you just go, obviously no further than Catholicism actually existed would be Catholic. But that connection was just so incredibly powerful and down through that line. And I don't know if it was the blood connection, because I was very intentionally going down my blood matriarchal line, or if it was some other connection. But that is definitely one of those, you do these trance workings and every now and again, one of them just sticks with you in a very visceral way. And that is one of the ones that just sticks with me so much so that I have all of these women who ended up giving birth to me, and just cool. Anyway, but it's that connection sort of so I think that there is something there. Like I said, I've only ever met my great grandmother, so I don't know any further back than that. I don't even have pictures, but there was something there in that working that was pretty powerful.
Yeah, well, I guess if we're, I think that we're all hard polytheists here, and so if we can embrace the concept of hard polytheism, saying all these things are separate and distinct, then I have no problem embracing the idea that all of these afterlives and all of these potential worlds are separate and distinct, and they actually exist out there. I mean, who am I to say to the Hellenes that lived thousands of years ago, no, that's not there. Yeah. It is there. It is there, and they're there. So I think that it's, and I think that your story is a good example of a potential that is, is actualized, that, is energetically there. And the quantum physicists would say, oh yeah, that does exist.
Quantum physics doesn't get much past a hypothesis at this point.
Well, I understand, but I like to think that they're hardcore polytheists as well. But
they might be, but the scientist in me occasionally wears up and be like, that's still a hypothesis.
Right. So my apologies to those who are not hard polytheists and who are theoretical physicists, but hey,
it's all possible. So much of what we do today was believed to be magic, 100 years ago.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think one of the interesting things about talking about the afterlife and the underworld and that whole what happens when we die is that it's one of the things that essentially transcends all cultures, all religions. Everybody has that question and nobody actually has the answer. They all have their own ideas, their own theories, but it's not just a lot of what we talk about here on the podcast and as the three of us is very Indo-European specific. And this is one of those ideas that is not at all, if you look at Mexican culture and the whole celebration of Day of the Dead and that, honoring of their ancestors and going to the cemetery, for them, that is where their dead is,
Also technically Indo-European.
Some of it, But a lot of those practices are native Mexican people, not Anglo people. So while Mexican people may be, their language may now be Indo-European, I don't think that most of their traditions necessarily are.
But if you look to the Far East, you're seeing a lot of the same traditions as well. There are traditions of honoring the dead. There are traditions of, treating your dead well so they don't come back and haunt you later. Yeah. But it's, but yeah, those traditions are very not just Indo-European.
Right. But you see some of the same practices. You see the laying out of a feast. You see, honoring the people who died before you and putting up an altar for them. And, so even though it's not our focus specifically, I think it's really, it sounds a little weird to say it out loud, but it's one of those places that I think that we can meet with others and have that conversation.
There are stories in the lore, though, of people, mortals like ourselves, who actually become immortal. And so in that case, the afterlife is kind of escaped or, averted because they're immortal now, so their afterlife really isn't a life after this one. It's this one ever after.
Yes, but I'm thinking about how most of them became immortal, at least the ones that weren't half god to start with. Most of them were cursed by a god in that process, and I'm not sure I want to go there.
Well, I think about there's a story of I think it might be Sumerian, but it's about Hashupishtin, who was the person who he and his wife helped with the flood, that kind of the flood that's a little different than the flood of Noah. And because of his helping, he and his wife helping, they're granted immortality. So they there is some intrigue along the way there, but in that case, it's it's a blessing, perhaps. 5,000 years later, let's talk to them and see. But
yeah, I mean, usually that happens in mythology, and it's tied to some sort of heroic act, and maybe multiple heroic acts. But usually, that is something that is gifted to heroes.
Right, absolutely. I mean, we see this, Perseus, for example, in the sky. He's immortal.
I mean, that's what most of the constellations are. I mean, right. You've got Orion up there too.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's true. I was sort of more thinking of the, Medusa and
the monsters.
Right. Yeah.
The various people who got turned into shrubbery or trees. There's a beautiful Norse story about a couple who, There's a story in the Norse mythology, and I can't recall it immediately details, but basically this couple really helped Odin out, and so he turned them into a pair of trees so they could live together side by side forever. Yay, great.
It's a beautiful story.
It's a beautiful story. It is actually a really cool story. It's an appreciative story of people who actually take care of other people and are welcoming and hospitality. But at the same time, they were old and they were dying, and then, they got turned into trees rather than die, which I suppose is cool. But I think I'm not sure I want to live for 5,000 years either.
Yeah, that's an interesting proposition.
Yeah. I watched too much Doctor Who.
I hear you.
So we barely touched on what we could talk about as far as it comes with the Otherworlds and the afterlife, and we will probably do a few more episodes later on this. But I think this is a good place to stop for today. So as we stop, it is my turn to do a reading for the next week, or the next couple weeks. And so I'm actually using tarot today.
Yay.
The first card is the Lovers.
Oh.
The second card is the Hermit. Oh, interesting. And then the last card is the Six of Swords. So the Lovers speak of relationship, of balance, of leaning on each other, depending on each other, being part of each other's lives in a very intricate, intimate way. The Hermit speaks of finding yourself, being comfortable on your own, being comfortable without others. These two make an interesting balance. The Six of Swords in this deck is about accepting help, understanding that you are not alone in the rocky seas, that there are ravens who will come and help draw you to the shore. All you have to do is accept their help. I think this reading talks of a balance between knowing yourself, being comfortable in your own skin, and having someone who you can rely on, that you can trust to pull you through the rocky seas. It's an interesting reading and worth much thought.
I think it's a beautiful reading, actually, very powerful. Thank you for doing that.
I love this deck. This is the Light Seers Tarot for folks who are interested to see, by Chris Ann. So there's your reading for the next 2 weeks. I suggest that you meditate on it and see what message it holds for you. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining us for today's video. If you like this episode, be sure to like and subscribe. You can also find more episodes on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast providers. You can find us on social media on Facebook and Twitter, or for more information, visit our website, triskelepodcast.weebly.com.